Welcome to the Integral Stage Sexuality series. I'm Layman Pascal, and before I host my high-priced week-long workshop on integrative sexuality at a seaside Caribbean resort, I need to make sure I've been fully exposed to the multidimensional richness and profundity of this topic. A topic that most people find deeply physically compelling, emotionally significant, and for some people intellectually fascinating and brimming with spiritual and developmental potential. Here to share the ins and outs of their understanding is... Is it Rojek or Rojek?
Rojek. Yep. Polish with the heart, with the J.
I'm in Canada, so my assumption is always slightly French.
Yes. Yep. And then people see me and I am Spanish background. So then they assume then there's a silent J anyway.
Well, terrific. Great to have you here. I sort of want to speak in general about sexuality and consciousness and personal development, but also with an emphasis on, how that's all maybe or maybe not experienced differently by different groups of humans.
Totally.
Right.
Yep.
So my friend David Hartful Jr. does a lot of work with race identity and developmental stages.
Yep.
I asked him who I should talk to about sex and race. He immediately suggested you.
Brilliant. Good. I love it. Let's get it.
Maybe the most concrete way to start is just to ask you what you've seen in terms of, differences between what different groups struggle with, require from sexual coaching and therapy. And, are you seeing differences, and what sorts of differences are you seeing?
Yeah, most definitely. So great question. There are absolutely differences. First, from a therapy standpoint, so never mind sex therapy, never mind being able to offer, however we want to offer it. From a therapy standpoint, white people dominate. Sorry if we, Caucasian, however you want me to say things, dominate. In general, then, Black folks, Mexicans, Native Americans, in that order, Asians, other. And it's a massive difference. So already just from an access perspective on how we'll allow help or ask for help, let's start there. Now let's add the sexuality on top of it, which we know culturally, well, for America and, Canada actually is very similar as well as other places. We don't talk very well about this. There's tons of suppression, oppression, and all of these issues, right? So most definitely then there again, I don't really see a whole lot of other races besides white folks. I do have sprinkles here and there for sure on any consciousness expansion, on any alternative anything, especially for sexuality. And it's really sad, honestly, that, and part of that has to do with cultural stories, racial stories about what it means to ask for help, right? And then also the wounding. It demonstrates to me how much pain there is for certain races that they can't come and even and accept help and ask for help. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Those two different dimensions are really intriguing in terms of who shows up or who's willing to show up.
Mm-hmm.
Which I guess is partly personal in terms of issues around sexuality and asking for help and things like that. And also partly it's got to just be the habits of the community.
Yes.
A lot of people would just never think that therapy is for them.
Right. Yes. And there's a really big, you touched on it, you just hit it. There's a stigma and there's this idea on what is therapy, what is asking for help, how is it that someone can actually help? And I think that's really the bigger thing is that we have such an apathy towards ourselves, right? Apathy is where it's hopeless and helplessness. It's where, man, the problem's just too big. I can't even do anything about it. And so when we have apathy towards ourselves, and then on this heavy topic, that doesn't have to be heavy. There's so much good connection. There's so much healing. There's so much wonderful, beautiful things when we say the word sexuality, because it encompasses so much. It's not just intercourse, right? It's not just in and out. There's so much about it. But then what that also says for us, and again, what we can allow in. And for most people, it's really that they don't think that they're savable. We've really relegated ourselves to human suffering and that's what life is for so many different reasons. And so if you've decided that, and that's the story you've committed to, until you're ready to commit to a new story, you're not going to have change and life will suck, as will your sexuality and your expression of it and every other relationship that you have.
So there's a little bit of a let's say, a group self-esteem issue around feeling like you deserve to have a better, happier, more fulfilling sexual life.
Yes. Yes. That's a very wonderful way to put it. Yes. Yeah.
So when people come to you,
Yep.
what are the general sorts of concerns that they have? What are the sorts of things they're asking for?
Yes. So actually, super remedial and basic. If I know 100 units of information on all types of areas of sexuality, and I'm talking about not just our interpersonal part of it, of how to identify, how am I oriented and all of that stuff, who do I love and what do they look like in attraction, talking about the sexuality aspects too of what does this mean about me? What does this mean in my expression? What am I allowing in all of this? If I know 100 units of information, especially on fetishes and kinks and different lifestyles and all this, I'm probably asked about 2% of what I know and what I could offer. That is the massive indicator as well. Is what is really, really interesting is, especially here in America, there's lots of objectified sexuality. And I'll answer your question, but there's a lot of objectified sexuality, right? So we see posters, we see half naked this and that and whatever's, and then, yep, we don't talk about it, right? It's still taboo. It's still very much a secret. People are not talking about what are other people doing. So there's all these myths. Then let's add porn, because people have questions and they don't know who to ask because no one is available to ask. Then they go to porn. And so let's figure that out. Okay, that's a setup for failure because there's a whole lot of things built into porn legally that they're not allowed to even show from an intimacy and perspective, intimacy perspective. So I'm saying all of that then mostly when first people find out that, okay, hey, sex therapist, you can talk to me. It's, am I normal? I'm only having sex if it starts on a sex conversation. I'm my husband or my partner and I am only having sex once a month or whatever the number is. Is that normal? So I'm getting a lot of just really basic on what are other people, and it's not kink fetish, huge questions. So very basically, people give themselves permission to see me for erectile dysfunction. Men will allow that for themselves to ask about that. They won't ask about other things, but they'll ask about that. Performance anxiety. Men will generally give themselves permission to ask me about that. And that's across the board, races and other things. What I do notice then, Black folks, the main first thing, if it's a guy that's going to ask a question that hears anything, their interest immediately goes into, I want more sex than what my partner does. And then I ask, did we already know where they were in their sex drive? Yeah, but so it's really on how do I get more of what I want without seeming like an asshole? Can I say that? Oops, sorry. How do I get what I want? So generally speaking, people want more sex, and it's not just men, but okay, men want more sex from their partners and in their lives. Men in particular, it's more of size and really just not even knowing. So it's really kind of basic stuff. Women then on the other side, women don't give themselves permission as much to ask about why they don't want sex. For them, it's more of, how do I keep others from wanting something from me that I don't want to give? So women in particular, the majority of the work is, what do you want? What are your boundaries? And let's stop pleasing everyone. So just to give a little context then for men and women, and then races also have different questions is what I'm noticing for sure.
So those particular issues go across demographic groups.
Yep. It doesn't seem to matter.
What do you see in terms of differences in terms of what racial groups are asking for?
Yep. So there again, Black men's interest, this is general, of course, I've had plenty of exceptions. Generally speaking, is really on, then they start being really curious about polyamory and swinging, more so because the sex drive thing seems to be more than what their partner wants. That's Black men in general. Indian men from India, Indian men that, because culturally and what I'm learning and seeing on what their access to information, truly access to information, they don't have the same access in the way we do right now, being able to ask these questions and have these forums. So constant questions on size. Is my size big enough? And does that mean satisfaction? No, it doesn't. You could have 2 inches or 20 inches, and you could have amazing or crap sex either way. It depends on, it's about the people, right? And so certain culture, then Asian as well, my smallest group of folks that I see, actually, because of, so size is a big question thing. And then really hard to get them to talk to me about this. Culturally speaking, then too, for a lot of Asian cultures, you don't reach outside. You do not talk about these things. And I don't care how long you've been in America or how many generations you're here. That is very much ingrained. For my Mexican and Hispanic population, it is all about shame and guilt and secrets. Molestation, incest is heavily, heavily built into the Black communities and Hispanic and Latin communities, heavily built into it. So it's going to be more so than not a general question of performance anxiety. It's going to be telling me the secret that they're not supposed to be telling, that's been going on, for a very long time in their families. So there's some to shoot out there. Native Americans. So I also get the opportunity to work with a lot of different Native American populations. There again, the barrier then towards asking for help is you have to suspend your own idea of sexuality and what your belief systems are. When we are coming and interacting then with folks that there's a spiritual component that they pay more attention to than a lot of the rest of us do, including Indians as well. So yeah, those are some of the things that I've noticed then.
That's terrific. I was really interested when you said, doesn't matter how many generations they've been here, because that suggests that the patterning isn't coming from, the abstract idea of a culture. It's happening in the family then.
Yes.
And I'm sure that a lot of people in general, but there's a sort of sacredness to the idea of the family that makes you not want to challenge the way you've been raised and the way you've been taught, makes you not want to share information about it. To what degree do you think that is suppressing people's ability to move toward a more enriched sexual life?
97%. Truly. This is those transgenerational patterns, and that's what that's called, right? The reason why we do this, children want to love their parents. Children want their parents to be their superheroes. Children also then don't have the concept until they're adults, and then they have to come see me in a therapy room of even admitting that their parents might have harmed them. You know what I mean? That is even when it's obvious to me, I'm like, you recognize that that's abuse, right? That is a really, really hard thing for some people to even want to say and admit. If they can't say it, admit, and for them, it's dishonoring them. What a lot of people have in their mind is, if I acknowledge the bad, then I'm saying that I don't like them or I don't love them, or that means I now have to not love them. I have a choice. If people have that story, which the majority of them do, then they certainly can't say these things, because then they're going to break the family in their mind. You're going to break the family. You're going to break the relationship. You may now be ostracized. You may lose the exact thing you're afraid of losing by challenging the secrets, by challenging how the BS is rolling downhill, if you have the strength to even be able to do that for yourself. It is huge to then put yourself and say, yeah, I was abused. There's 90% of people, right, who are sexually abused and molested. It's from people they know. It's not the stranger that jumps out at the park that comes and grabs you. So to say these secrets is then to say, hi, my family sucks. Here's my family's dirty laundry. The family is going to be very resistant to you letting the world know that they suck. You know what I mean? Like, that's obviously super ridiculous terms to use, but so there's so much to lose for people in their minds by speaking their truth, because of the fact of what it could mean to them. And yeah.
So there's such a risk involved that when you see people who make that shift to speaking about it or reaching out for help, what is it that empowers them to reach out or make a change when there's so much risk and so much family machinery against it?
This one's easy. Have you ever gotten to the place where you woke up one day, and maybe it was right when you woke up, or you walked by the mirror, or that thing happened, and it was just either put the gun in your mouth or do something? And now you're so uncomfortable in your uncomfortableness, in your sadness, in your upset, in the way that life did not turn out and does not feel how we need it to feel. We don't feel purposeful. We don't feel when you get to that place, that is a desperate place. It's my favorite place for people to get to. When people are desperate, all of their rules and all their stories that held them and kept them in That is the fastest way for them to burn up. People, when they're desperate, will do anything, finally, anything, and ask for help to stop the pain of breathing. They know that it's not supposed to hurt to breathe. We know that life is supposed to feel better. We know that we're supposed to live our human potential and to be happy, and that this can be better. And even if we've never seen it demonstrated in our lives, intrinsically as humans, that is the human evolution, is that we evolve and that we have consciousness and that we have awareness. When people get to that desperate place, I need help. That's when they're like, I've seen you, I've watched you, I heard you, or somebody said something, or whatever it is. I don't care anymore about the pain it might cause my family, because the pain that I am feeling is so unbearable and I'm not ready to die yet. You know what I mean?
It's terrible and beautiful at the same time.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's powerful stuff. And then, to have that fear, and it'll come back up when they get out of desperation a little bit. And now we get to work a little bit together. It absolutely comes back up. Then that fear of, oh my God, what have I done? Or what is this going to do to my family? What is this going to, what is it going to do? Let's talk about that. You changing the script, you're changing the script, right? Every interaction and every relationship, there's an exchanging of scripts. Here's the story I tell about life. Here's the story you tell about life. Here's how we're going to support each other in telling that same story, or a new one if we have consciousness about it. Yeah. It's how does this change the story? And what do you want it to be? And do we need to find new family, our own chosen family then? And it doesn't always have to be that either. A lot of times the family was waiting for the whistleblower. You know what I mean? They didn't have the strength to do it themselves. The family knows their shit. They know that they've perpetuated this. They know the secrets that they've kept. They know honor and pride and ego when it's gotten in the way of their relationship. You know how much energy it takes to have to maintain holding on to that, the ego and the pride of what will people think in a massive amount, an immense amount. And so really families and people do want to let go of that more than their fears most often. It's just whether or not they'll give themselves permission to actually go through the fire. That is scary. And it's scary to do by yourself. That's the number one thing is, am I alone really? In all the questions in the question of, is my size and what are other people doing? And is it enough? And is it, and all that? And the asking, am I normal? Am I alone? And how alone people feel in all of these things. And then yet here it is, we're talking about it. And I'm like, I have massive groups of people that have this same pain conversation, and they think they're all by themselves in it. They think that nobody else understands, or they're too afraid because they've been told that nobody else, we don't talk about these things, right? So nobody else has the issue, it is time to have a freaking conversation and make this easier. This can be loving. This can be easy. This can be healing if we can allow it.
There's something, I see like a subtle parallel between the feeling of being alone and the sense that sexuality comes to us in this objectified form you were talking about. I was thinking of a moment years ago. I was at the supermarket with my friend, and he did this stupid thing. He elbows me and points to a magazine cover. He's recognized an attractive figure, and he wants my confirmation. I'm like, what are you involving me for? This doesn't need to be confirmed. But then I looked at the magazine. I thought, he's not attracted to anyone like that. I've known him his whole life. Whoa. He's never moved sexually toward anybody who looked like that. There's a very particular type of person I've seen him always move toward.
Yeah.
His notion of attraction is cultural attraction, but that's not actually his personal attraction. And there's a gap there. And I imagine he feels alone in his personal world because he thinks about himself through the cultural lens.
Yes. Taking ownership of a story that's not yours. That's that's also how we have internalized critic, right? Most people's internal critic was an external person and their idea, and then they believed part of their story and then took it in for themselves. And that's their internalized critic. It's the same idea, exactly like what you said. is they have their own lens, but there's almost this idea then too that I'm supposed to identify with this. I'm supposed to find this attractive. I'm supposed to respond this way to these types of stimulus, good, bad, or otherwise, because culturally that's what it says. A really good example of this in relationship. With my husband, we've had this conversation lots of times. There'll be something that he'll do, and I'll have a moment of my own awareness of, culturally speaking, I should be really pissed about this. Culturally speaking, if I were to ask a friend or I were to post it online and say, hey, what should I do about this behavior? Everyone would say, he's a dick, separation, cause an argument, be an uproar. But there's moments on that topic and I'll stop and I'll be like, how do I actually feel about it? I'm not really bothered. I'm not even really upset about it, but it's almost in my attempt to create a problem because that's what we're used to doing. You see, we're used to that being a problem for most people. And I have to check myself. Is it actually a problem for me? Well, no. So why am I trying to make it one? Okay, let's not do that. Very much the same thing. It's, oh, everybody else says that this is attractive. Everybody else says, hey, look at that. Or there's a half naked or a this or us or whatever we see. And we're like, oh, look at that thing. Do you actually even really care about that thing? Are you even attracted to that person? Is that even in your orientation? Let's just say that. So it is amazing how much influence and more influence actually that people would rather reach for the truths outside of them then acknowledge and own their own truth. How many people have you heard of these stories or that you even know, or you yourself, you had an amazing experience, but then you hear or read something out here that might've been similar or might've been a little different, whatever it is. And then you question, like, was it really that powerful? Did I experience the experience in the way that I thought I experienced it? You question yourself. We are so taught and ingrained to reach outside of ourselves for help. But what is that doing? That's placing responsibility outside of ourselves. We cannot get to awareness if we're not taking ownership and responsibility for ourselves. If we believe that God or demons or any other thing, and it doesn't just have to be that, any other thing is out there just scheming against us, you are enslavement to that thing and it's and your happiness now. You've given your power away. No one else can create in your experience except for you. We have to take ownership of that, right? We've got to take responsibility for ourselves so we can make change.
There are a couple interesting questions around orientation that come up for me. And, one of them is on the racial issue is sort of how frequently do you see people whose orientation crosses racial lines and in particular ways? I'm trying to relate it to myself a little bit. Like if I look at my life or also like the way I viewed pornography, there's some types of bodies like, oh yeah, okay, great. I like to see Caucasians. I also like to see Persians. I never really look for Chinese people. That's sort of,
Oh, okay.
It's like a signature. There's a patterning there.
Yes.
And I'm curious, when you've talked to people from different races,
Yep.
How common is it for people to be aware of, I don't even know how to ask this, how much of their energy is oriented toward their group? How often do people have, like, I know some people who've, like, white guys who've only dated black women, and that's a really interesting phenomenon. Mm-hmm. How common is a phenomenon like that? And how much do people know about their own sort of interracial sexual proclivities?
Sure. Yes. Not a whole lot of awareness. There's just not a whole lot of awareness in general in sexuality. There's a lot of questions one would have to ask themselves. There's potentially a lot of fear, a lot of judgment, right? That one would have to ask themselves. So across the board, not generally. That's a great question. I love that you're asking it. So yes, there are lots of those folks. Now, some people, it is truly that's just what is attractive, right? Okay, we can't help that. We're not even sure how that gets created sometimes on what I find attractive. Some of that is created just because, some of it is absolutely created based on what your mom looked like. I mean, it doesn't matter how Freudian that sounds to you, but it's exactly true on what your mom looked like or your primary caregivers, ones that you feel great affection for, and your father, what they look like, right? Whoever you identify with. And then there's also fetishizing, right? Of different races, cultures, things like that. And then that's where, in that example of and not all people, but absolutely where I've got white guy friends too, or girlfriends for that matter, that then they say, oh, I want to date a Black woman or whatever, or this particular Asian women in particular, of course, are very objectified because of their submissive, the idea of their submission. So are we talking fetishism? Are we, and in which case then that's power and control. Then for that person, it's not about, this is truly what I'm attracted to. In those cases, that's a power and control thing. And that's the group of people, for whatever reason, that they think that they can control better than others. It is not always about that. However, then in conversation with folks is most of the time then, I don't know why, I just am. Okay. Or I traveled somewhere and I got exposed. A lot of people, quite honestly, and depending on where you live, you do not have access to other races. So therefore, you just don't see enough faces to be like, oh yeah, there's ugly ones and pretty ones and ones that I'm attracted to. Does that make sense? I'm mixed race. I'm 9 nationalities, and most people can't tell what I am a lot of the times, depending on where I go. I've lived in multiple places. I was raised in California, and in California where I was raised, white people was the minority, right? So it was tons of everybody else. It wasn't a conversation. It wasn't a thing. I moved to Washington State. There were 5 brown people, brown, that's not just Black, 5 brown people at all in my entire school. It was not a place that had other races. Matter of fact, I was just talking about that this morning. So from that perspective, then it's who I have access to. There's places I've traveled. I go work in hospitals all over the country and all over internationally. They had, and we would bring a whole bunch of consultants. A lot of the consultants were Black and Nigerian. We were in so many places that had literally grown adults never seen a Black person face to face. If they've actually never seen one, how attracted would they actually be and interested and even be open then to having the conversation of other races you see? So a lot of it is exposure.
That's a great point. I mean, so much of it, especially when we were talking about the difference between the the social idea of attraction and the personal idea of attraction. The personal idea of attraction has got to be based so much on your circumstantial engagements with other people in your environment.
Yep. Yeah.
There's an interesting thing about like sexual essences, let's say, right? Because there's habit and there's cultural conditioning, and there's even when I was a kid, I used to read a lot of stuff about brain imprinting ideas from the 70s, right? The idea that when you're very little, you take a snapshot of who's an appropriate mating object.
Yes, like
so
object.
There's all of that, all these forms of acquisition, and then there's these forms of inheritance, like biologically that's who I am, or maybe even spiritually I have a particular gender essence or something like that. How do you hold that difference between sort of acquired and inherited sexual identities?
Ask questions. I mean, really, it's I'm gauging, what do you know about yourself? Like, it's not, when I'm asking these types of questions too, it's not so much, oh, so I can know, and so I can put you in a box and a label. It's what boxes and labels are you putting on yourself, first of all? And do you have any awareness on where did you get that? And I do ask those types of questions. Okay. So if you were to come in and say, okay, Sabrina, I'm attracted to Vietnamese women. Okay, brilliant. Why? Or how did you get there? Oh, I'm not sure. And that's a totally valid answer. I'm not sure. Oh, okay. So then for whatever reason, that just became attractive to you. Or do you have a story, right? I traveled somewhere, or I was raised. I mean, here's another one. I was raised, I had a nanny, or I had heavily influence from this culture. And so then again, exposure was a little different. Okay. Spiritually then speaking, for your orientation, how you feel about yourself, the spectrum of sexuality and who you choose to love and express that with, and all of those things, that there again. So let's say if someone comes to me and they say, I'm hetero. Okay, brilliant. Did you choose that? No, I was born this way. Okay, that's a question to ask, right? Most of the time, and even when then we start looking at LGBTQIA and all of the other funds, that there's an idea that this is a choice. For the most part, that percentage is very, very small on those that would choose to be other, especially in our society. Our society does not like other and does not like sexual others, right? So there are people Very few. Please, whoever is hearing this, do not leech on to what you want to hear that serves your story. There are people then that would say and choose, if you've been molested, if you've been raped, and let's say if you were cisgendered identified woman, then you were raped by a man. There are plenty that then say men are not safe. So now I'm choosing and allowing myself then to be with women or whatever else it is that I want to be with. So there is that percentage then that made a choice versus what they would then say they were born with, and that intrinsic, and then that that spiritual sense too of who we are. Does that make sense?
Yeah. The notion of the relationship to the other seems really deep, because I was imagining, a hypothetical type of person who's very bothered by the sexuality of others, even to the point where they would love the law to get involved and criminalize it. And maybe these are also the same people who are exaggeratedly bothered by racial others, by, they have exaggerated immigration concern. They have exaggerated concern about trans bathrooms or things like that.
Yes.
Right. So that there's something very common among all of that. I mean, on the one hand, there's a genetic element to it. Like when you're concerned about sexual reproduction and you're concerned about race, the genes are somehow in both of those. But also there's this psychodynamic element of the relationship to the other.
Yes.
So how do we have a better relationship to otherness in general?
You have to have a better relationship with yourself. All relationships are a reflection between the relationship between you and you. To the degree that you look at something as other.
I'm the first other.
Yes. Yes. It is exactly right. How many people internally, I mean, that's the human suffering is fear of separation. All suffering, for what I found in the work that I'm doing and with people and how I work with them, all human suffering is a fear of separation from something. And so to the degree that other would be such a threat, when people are like, what we're talking about is those people that it's like, they're taking it really, really personal on what people choose to do and who they choose to love. How is this affecting you in your life that you would be so angry about this? If there's an abortion clinic, and this is a heavy topic for people, but if there's an abortion clinic down the road and you morally don't agree with that, you get to disagree with that and you get to agree with that. People get to be that. Why is that such? People have this idea that it's impacting them personally. If someone were to go walk in that clinic, does it actually have an effect on your life and your person and who you are, right? But yet it just amps people up and gets them all freaked out. Why? That's what we have to look at. Why are people wanting to choose to look at other? Why do we do this? The only times that people do that is when they are unsure of themselves and what they believe about themselves and who they are. That is the only way all of these other things could be a threat to my person and to my safety, to my psyche. That it would bother me so much just to observe these things that I would wish for them to be eradicated. Let's really think about that. What type of mind space do you truly have to be? That's not love at all. That's not expansion. That's an enormous amount of constriction. There is an enormous amount of self-disconnect between their own happiness. If somebody makes those types of comments, I know what type of person you are. You are not a willing participant in your own life, and you were probably not honoring who you are and what you want often enough that then how someone else chooses to live their life would be a threat to your own. You hadn't defined it yet. You're not that clear. And so people get really upset at how dare them. And actually, here's another little piece is my favorite is how dare them give themselves permission to be who they want to be. That's actually what pisses people off the most. It hurts them because they recognize that someone else is speaking their own truth, even if it's a truth that could be disruptive to other people's ways of thinking. It is only disruptive to your way of thinking if you are a sloppy thinker, if you are not owning and responsible for your thinking, if you're not a good gatekeeper to your thoughts. How unhappy must you be to be so unhappy with what everyone else is doing? Focus on yourself. Fix yourself. It's so much easier to bitch about what everybody else is doing because then there's no responsibility in it. I don't have to fix me. I have to fix the world. That is an impossible task now, isn't it? So it's self-fulfilling. I'm right, they're wrong. and I get to be right and they're wrong and I feel good. And that's the only time that they're feeling good in their day, is when they get to separate themselves or have this idea of separation, you see.
One of the things I've found myself asking in this interview series is whether people think more or fewer things should be sexualized. And what I mean is, when you talk to people who are Tantra teachers,
Yes.
they're very interested in the idea that sexuality could be extended to everything in the cosmos, essentially.
Yes.
And on the other, when you talk to people from a more therapeutic angle, they sometimes talk about your sexual energy is in the wrong place. You're sexualizing things that shouldn't be sexual, or like you're describing, these people who are hyper agitated about things that don't necessarily relate to their personal life. The question of, where does that energy come from? Is that some of their sexual energy going to the wrong place?
I happen to agree with that. Sexual energy and this. Okay, so now we're getting into some things too. So, okay, what's the accessible, easy way to say this? Sexual energy is a creative energy. When you're talking about Tantra, if you start talking about Kundalini, if you're talking about Anking, right, which Anking of energy from Egyptian perspective is the same thing as Kundalini rising. There's a different word that we use in different cultures and tribes across the board on this idea of sexual energy, and that's the label of that energy that rises in us, that is the access to the cosmos and to the consciousness and the awareness, and those things. So whether it's sexual energy or not, then it makes sense that would be one way to describe it. Because what is happening? When do humans also have the most satisfaction? When there's an actual climax. That's why anger is also a really interesting emotion. But climax, what does it feel like? It feels like, and I'm pointing down below. I mean, you can't see, but I'm pointing down coming from our loin area, from your first chakra, from your first energy space, whatever you want to call it. Energy does move up. It feels the same way as an orgasm, right? What does it happen? Tension builds, or an energy builds until there's a release. Anger is actually the same thing. We build until we get to have a release. That's why a lot of people really like the emotion anger. It's a creative energy. It's a moving energy. It's a changing energy. So 2 parts answer. I'm coming around to it. So here I go. So the 2-part answer is, 1, I believe then that you could absolutely call that life force energy, if you want to call that prana, if you want to call that whatever you want to call that. Yes, it could be very easily described as sexual energy. Sure, if that serves you. And there's the other part of it that is misplaced sexual energy, right? That is the angstiness. This is the people then that become sex addicts or have that type of obsessive quality in nature to sex, and the having of it and the obtaining of it and the power and control of it and all of those things, you see. So that is the very low vibration, regular kind of space that most people are in with their sexuality. And in which case, yes, you can misplace that sexual energy. You could also not understand where it's coming from. You can also not know that you're using it for power and control. That's not the same energy that I'm talking about when we are talking about that consciousness connection. Did that answer it a little bit?
Yeah, that was great.
Okay.
Hey, pointing down to the loin area made me think of a thing that's cultural and racial and interesting to me. And, I've seen this old footage of white girls passing out when they saw Elvis, and the idea that Elvis was uniquely wiggling his pelvis at the time. It was so arousing, but, it's been pointed out over the years that essentially he was bringing in a lot of black music, a lot of black body moves and things like that to the white population that had, if you watch movies from the 30s, the white people just sort of dance straight up and down or in circles. They don't wiggle
Yes.
So, do you see the ability for bodies to move, and in particular for pelvises to move around, as a different thing among the different racial types of people that you treat?
Absolutely. Look at how different tribes dance. Right? Look at exactly like what you said. If we're talking about white folks, okay, what does that mean, right? We're generalizing a color for race and culture. So if we then get specific for the different races and cultures that make up what we say are the white peoples or white folks, and again, I do want to say this piece. apologizing if there is any offense that people are taking. That is not how it's meant. There is a separation for sure on the generalization of color. I am recognizing that I also, this is how I talk about it. And so that could be offensive and upsetting for some people. So anyways, not my intention. And there it is. So yes, that, absolutely. So you have to then look at the different races, the different cultures that we are talking about within it, because white people, who were some of the first white people here? Spaniards. Do we actually, what's really kind of funny then is from our perspective, do we actually look at white people as Spaniards? We have a really weird thing. They're brown whenever it upsets us and when we need it to be, and they're white whenever we need, you know what I mean? Really interesting thing. So how do they dance? How do they move culturally? How does their tribe, right? It's a very large tribe. How does their tribe move? We look at African tribes and things like this. And so generally speaking, they say Black people have more rhythm and can sing better. There's a lot of statistics that have shown that, hey, as a race, interesting that there is a whole lot of these types of qualities that these people tend to have for one reason or another. So yeah, how you can move absolutely is built in. And then of course is passed down. Let's then also add the other layer of whatever you were shown on how to wiggle and what feels good and what your family gave permission for moving, right? We absolutely have to consider certain races, certain cultures, certain all of this. No, anything that would look provocative, anything that would make someone focus on sexuality, especially in religions and races and cultures that sexuality is demonized, not allowed, then now that has to be considered. The third piece is there any body shame? Is there any movement shame that has happened for that person and within their life? Because then they're going to add that onto whatever other, allowances that they've given to themselves. So yes, and yes. The one then big, huge misnomer, I will say then, and I'd like to point out, myth is just because somebody's a really good dancer doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be good in bed. What it does mean is that, hey, they might be a little bit more flexible. Hey, they might have a little bit of a different movement and all of that sort of a thing. There again, it comes down to you and whoever you're partnering with and partnersing with, if that's who is, you say. So yes, is the overall answer.
Okay, great. The notion of what's culturally allowed leads me to think about, the tension between permissive and non-permissive cultures, right? And people make arguments for both, right? The people who, let's say you got a culture where women are mostly completely covered. People will make this argument saying, look, this prevents sexuality from getting out of hand in public, and we can't trust the public. It keeps private things private, and it has this added glamour of making small things like an ankle into sexually glamorous experiences. Right. On the other hand, you'd say, and they would sort of demonize permissive cultures where you can walk around and see people almost completely undressed. Exactly. But then the argument for that would be, well, people get to see and think about sexuality more, and they have to be more civilized because they have to be able to act responsively in the face of stimulation rather than eliminating stimulation.
Exactly. That's a big thing that you just said. Actually, the eliminating of the thing still being there, and what do you do? But yes, go ahead. Keep with your question.
I just want to know if you have any thoughts about those two things, because I'm very intrigued by the potential usefulness of provocation to move a civilization forward, because it requires more of you.
Yeah. This is a big question. It's a great question, because it starts bumping up against people's morality and mortality and what do they believe, and is their belief system stable? For me personally, do you and be great. If you're not hurting someone else and you're not hurting yourself, let it all be out there. I personally don't have, I don't take it as a threat seeing people do whatever they do, whether I agree with it or not, right? It makes no difference to me. So I think there's a value in a culture or a race that has evolved to the place where sexuality isn't a thing of suppression, repression, because we recognize that all things are allowed. Expansion of consciousness is the only thing that matters. And from that place, if you then choose to cover yourself all the way up because of the fact that it's you can see that. I'll share that with whoever I feel I want to share that with. And I also recognize I don't want people, maybe it's a personal thing. I don't want you to be able to judge me based off of what I look, or maybe it's this feels the best to me. This is my expression of sexuality. A lot of people think that would never be the case, right? Then I would say, cover all the way up or be all the way naked, whatever is then that highest expression. There are a few of these different cultures that is the case. Unfortunately, it's not for most of them that we know about. So I think it's wonderful when we have all these options and the contrast for us to be able to clarify what we want. And that's what it's all about, right? If we then start talking about law of attraction and law of these and these types of things, it's what do I choose to focus on? I could see something completely covered up and still sexualize it if I want to. I could see a completely naked body and, of course, completely sexualize it if I want to. So ultimately, does it really matter whether or not you have the exposure to it? So here's the bigger thing of what I hear you asking. And is, by the talking about this thing, does it make people do it more? I mean, really, that's kind of what's underneath it as well. No, that's the big problem. That's the problem that we've had in particular with sexuality and teaching of it and all of these things is and the idea was, that's why it was eradicated, right? Masturbation, stop doing it. Kellogg's cornflakes were made to help people stop masturbating. They wanted something bland that didn't activate energy. There's so much energy that has been put towards the second we make something a problem, we're focusing on it and we're generating feeling. You're creating more of it. By making something a problem, you are making it separate. So it could be a problem for you if you choose it. You see what I'm saying? It ultimately does not matter. It does not matter. If that's the thing that you want to make a problem, you will make it a problem. And by the making of it a problem, you will obsess and you will create more of the same. And that's it.
There's it's like you're seeing a sort of cutoff or a key membrane at the level of a culture embracing personal individual experience, right? So that whatever the patterns are viable if they're coming from a personal or even post-transpersonal place, but not viable if they're coming from a pre-personal place. But then this other element really intrigues me, like that the idea that suppression is a failure is interesting because on the one hand, yes, it's not eradicating or minimizing things to get rid of the things that remind you of those things. It doesn't work. It might even increase them. So it's bad strategy. On the other hand, maybe it's good strategy if the result they want is not to eradicate things, but to pass on trauma, to have a reason to have these generations of trauma. Do you see that as a motive?
Ask the motive again. Ask it one more time. I liked the question, so I want to hear it again.
Essentially, do you think passing on trauma is something that motivates us? Like we come up with a reason to go, like, I want to get rid of this because it's bad. And then the thing I do doesn't get rid of it. But what it does is fuck some people up in the process. And maybe that's what I really wanted because that happened to me. And I think that's what you have to do.
Hurt people hurt people. That's the answer. In it is absolutely. If you were to ask someone and to say, hey, do I want to hand down trauma? We don't say it in that way. That's exactly what they're doing. When you're upset and you're feeling pain, that's why they say misery loves company, right? There's those people that no matter what is going on, they're bitching about something. Life sucks. It's horrible. It's all of this sort of a thing. That's the story they're telling themselves. So yeah. And that's the story you're telling yourself. Yes, you're going to keep creating more and more and more of that, right? And so from that place, we are bullies. We are assholes. We, and then even if you're in the type of person of codependency that you're the victim and, or the martyr, that, oh, I've given up myself, selflessly, I've given up my hopes and my dreams for you. That is the grossest form of manipulation, just so we know, just as a side note. However, when we're doing that, you're absolutely handing down the trauma. And in order to have willing participants, in order for a codependent to create a new codependent so that they can be codependent on, so they can give emotional responsibility to them, I have to be in an immense amount of hurt. That is a form of hurting. That is a form of trauma, and it is one of the worst traumas. And there are absolute times, just even on an easier, lighter note, that for whatever reason, I'm not having the best day. I don't feel good today. So then I notice I start picking on my kids. I start I'm looking for things to get them in trouble for, right? Because I'm angsty. I'm not happy. So the shit rolls downhill, right? It's that idea of, I yell at you and then you turn and yell at the next kid and the kid, then eventually the dog gets kicked and the mouse gets thrown outside. Whatever happens is that we're just passing on the pain. That will happen 100% of the time and has happened in the majority of people's lives because of the lack of awareness. The majority of the work that I do with people, really, if we could sum it up in one word, whether it's there's consciousness and there's expansion, and we're working on the shift your shit. And I've got the emotional components for people that are stuck in that space. I've got the space for the people that are at the next level of dimension of creation, that, out of body experiences and future stuffs, and that want to see all these things. So we've got these different components and all of this sort of a stuff. At the end, or rather at the beginning of all of it, the same component is the same. Are you hurt? What is your relationship to it? And if you do not have awareness, then even unwittingly, you will pass these things on. Absolutely, because there's no way that you can't, right? So I guess that's yeah. There's no way you can. Hurt people. So yes, we willingly then pass on our trauma. It feels good to make other people feel bad. I hate to say it, but my point with the kids is every once in a while, if I'm really thinking about it, it's like, oh, somehow I felt better about that, right? That I got to say, I'm right, you're wrong. I'm big, you're small. What I get to do, what I say goes, and being a dictator. It's so much easier to be that way with people, really, than it is to consider them and have a conversation and have to work through our differences. Much easier to be a dictator and hurt other people in that way.
How much of the the impulse to hurt and the impulse to control comes out of refusal to acknowledge or take ownership of aggression and cruelty in ourselves? And how do you help people take that ownership?
Yeah. The first thing is recognizing, where did this come from? So we go back. And so the first question is okay, first, when was the last time you felt this? Whatever you're feeling, whether it's the part of you that wants to be controlling or whether it's the part of you that was controlled, that you are now expressing it with other people in this way. When was the last time you felt that? We start there. And then eventually we're working to, when was the first time you felt that? That was the moment of break. That was the moment of trauma, big T, little t, however you want to call it. So tell me about that. Tell me the story as you remember it. So then they tell me, what was the makeup, what was happening, who was in it. Now, what was the meaning you took from that? So then it's, oh, well, that meant I wasn't good enough. That meant I wasn't lovable, right? People who abuse other people were abused. It doesn't work any other way unless there was some sort of a chemical something that happened. And in which case you get these rare cases of actual psychopaths and things like this. They're rare people. Abused people abuse other people who abuse other people, or create the codependence that can support their abusive behavior, right? We got to keep these cycles going some kind of way. And so the questions then is, let's identify, what is the problem? How are you acting? Is it aggressive? Is it this? What is the problem? So then 2, what is the story? 3, what is your meaning? Then 4, I asked, and I have steps. This is actually my shift your shit 8-step cycle. I have these steps. And then we ask, what did you need instead? What were you needing in that moment? And how old were you, right? So we go back to, and where some people are 3 years old, they're 2 years old, 9 months, whatever it was. How old were you? At every area in our life that there has been an emotional trauma, mental trauma, we emotionally arrest at that age. It happens every single time. So when someone walks into the room, I'm actually more so trying to gauge what year old am I working with today?
Right.
And so we go back, and so we can identify those things. And what did it mean? Just by people recognizing the story and then what their meaning was to it. How did you interpret that? And what could it have meant? Could it have meant this was a hurting person, that this person didn't have it all together? We don't think that way as children. We think our parents and these adults, they know all of these things. So we clean it up. We clean their relationship to it. We clean up, what did you need then? And so then we build internal strength. So what I was saying in the beginning of, no matter who I work with, in what capacity, at what level, it all comes down to, it's reparenting. It's really, that's what it is I'm teaching people how to reparent themselves. What did you not get along the line? What could you then not offer to yourself along the line? And how do we now be able to recognize what we need, give it to ourselves? So then that way, remember, everyone else is a reflection between the relationship between me and me. So then that way I can also attract and be surrounded with more of those types of relationships that I was needing. When you look around, when people say, I have people in my life that, or some random person said a mean thing and I felt bad about this. Why did you create that experience? It's easy to get mad at them and put responsibility on them. But because I believe all relationships are a reflection between me and me. So then I say, oh, so when was the last time you felt that way about yourself? Whatever mean thing they said that you felt, if you felt unworthy, if you felt whatever, if you felt like they didn't care about you, when was the last time you made you feel that way? Again, so then all of our conversation that we've had, really, whether it's culturally, socially, and all of this stuff, every single bit and piece of this comes down to, what is the relationship between you and you? These people out here couldn't even show up if you weren't in a certain space, if you didn't already believe that about yourself, you see, because otherwise there would be no need. It's not a problem. We're not looking at it as a problem. We attract the things to us that we believe, the stories that we're telling. You just use it. Use it as an indicator. So that's the biggest thing that I teach. Use your relationships in these random events. They're not random. You created them. You had to exchange a script, whether it was, you know what I mean? You created it. Just use it as a reflection, as a measurement of some of the last thoughts you were thinking about yourself. They could not show up unless you had already had that thought about yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah. The relationship between self and self reminds me of consciousness. And it seems like consciousness is a big factor here. And I can think of a couple different modes of bringing consciousness to experience. Like one is a classic meditative mode where you're going to show up as kind of mental witness of what's arising. Another one is what you're talking about, kind of more consciousness of the history and the story and the way you've been making meaning and that kind of stuff. And then another part of consciousness is its embodiment, right? Because it seems like when we're agitated by someone else's sexuality, whether we're provoked from within by an urge to replicate trauma, these are surges of energy that we often, in hindsight, we might regret, but we miss them in the moment because we're not present enough in our bodies to contain that energy. And so it just gets away from us. So, what's the role of the experience of body in your work?
Ooh, somatic therapy is a huge thing, right? The body, right. Okay. So here we go. I'm like, So on top of being a sex therapist and a therapist, then I'm alternative holistic practitioner, medical practitioner. I've been in the medical field for 20 years and then switched into holistic and all that stuff too. So really, really interesting stuff, right? The mind and body, the emotions and body are not separate. We know this, but yet people don't know this. And it's evident in the way that we talk. So massive trauma is stored in the body. All disease, dis-ease, regardless of your opinion. We all have different opinions, right? We know about those. How I feel about it and in my learnings and the truths that I know is all disease is energetic. It's thoughts and emotions caught in your grid. If you're telling, and we know this also because of placebo, right? When there's tons of studies on when patients have hope that they're going to live, miracles happen, right? They were like, doctors have no idea. They didn't even give them a pill and magically like tumors gone, body healed, things that should not have happened because of the fact of what you think and what you believe is absolutely your truth. And if you believe it, and a belief is just a thought you keep thinking. Okay. A belief is just a thought you keep thinking and generating feeling to come with it. Right. So feeling becomes the magnetizer to the thought that you created. So from that perspective, a ton of my work then touches on body stuff is get massage or do even biofield tuning, or if there's a certain amount of touch involved, recognizing that if, especially with trauma, here's a very easy example. If someone has an attacker of any sort and this person, jumps out, grabs them, overpowers them for whatever reason, and fight, flight, or freeze. Either you freeze or you try, whatever. Especially for the people that did not fight back. They froze. They judged themselves horribly for this, first of all. But they froze. That's what happened. One of the first things that we do, besides giving a lot of tools to be able to ground, one of the very first things we do is you have got to let the body express whatever it would have expressed. There was movement. There was energetic movement that was interrupted that is crucial to psyche's development and psyche's healing. So much so, it has been observed in tons and tons of animals that when there's an antelope, that freaking lioness coming after it, antelope gets away. You got scratched up a little, you got smacked around, the thing gets away. All of these animals that have these near-death experiences every single time would spend a moment of trembling. Have you seen this or have you heard about this? Shaking, violent shaking type of thing. Have you ever been pissed off enough that you were like, I am so angry or I'm so active, your body is shaking. There is an immense amount of physical energy, the energy that we cannot see, but the way that we can feel it is because it is this welling up, or it is these uncontrollable, my body is vibrating. There's so much energy in it right now. That absolutely has to be expressed. Anger, all of that, in a safe way, in a way that's useful, but it has to be expressed. And so the somatic piece of this is, if somebody now in their adult self, if I say, what would you have done if attacker is coming? We physically have them do that push off. That is an expelling the physical energy. Why do people get so amped up? And it's so wonderful to go work out and to lift weights and to do something physical, because you are physically moving the energy and the chemicals. There are chemicals that are physically in your body that come, you're moving them out of your body, and it is a must. When those animals and their violent shaking was interrupted, when they didn't get to complete that, every single one of those animals died. It is that intense and that important. Humans are then the only animals that do not die when they have that type of physical exertion, energetic explosion. We're the only ones that don't die. We die internally, don't we? That is powerful. That is huge. It is necessary then in all things, in your joy, in your anger, in your whatever, to get that energy out. And it usually requires a physical motion. So somatic therapy, absolutely. I tell people all the time, hey, we moved a lot of emotional stuff. Drink a lot of water. Get that shit flushed out. There's actual chemical components that are in your body, not just the energetic of it. When you get in the shower, imagine the shower. It's not just the water that's pouring on your body. Imagine it as light, and it's pouring over your aura. It's pouring into your grid. It's pouring into all aspects of yourself and filling everything and letting it go down the drain. You need to imagine those things, because whether or not you think that you can see it, it is there. Right? And it is important. It does have to be moved. Absolutely.
I was interested in your bio to see sexual hypnotherapy. I've done some hypnotherapy and, thought about sexual elements of it. I think the obvious one is that a slightly modified state of consciousness allows people to access and re-script their beliefs. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious, what you think trance is, and what you think the similarity is between induction and arousal and seduction.
Induction and arousal. I'm going to have to think about that part. Okay. So the first question, tell me your first question again.
What is trance?
Yes. I had it. Okay. Yes. So brain waves. We've got different types of brain waves. You don't have to memorize them, so I don't even need to say them. We have different types of brain waves. Some then are conscious. Right now, we're in a certain brain wave state, right? When we go to sleep, we're in another brain wave state. So we've got alpha, beta, theta, we've got delta, we've got these different things. So from a trance perspective, here's the simple. This is what we're doing. We are relaxing the left hemisphere of the brain, which is your manager. The left hemisphere of the brain, its job is to be logical. It's to filter in all the data that we receive and make choices on what it will accept as its truth. The right hemisphere of the brain then is all imagination and creation. Absolutely. And it accepts whatever gets to come through to it as truth, as simply is. And then it acts from that place. So that's a very simple biology lesson on what happens there, right? We can use all kinds of prefrontal cortex, whatever. That's what happens. So in trance, we go into trance all day, every day. When you're driving and then you're driving to that place that you know very well and you space out. There are times I have so vividly pictured whatever I was imagining that I don't even remember seeing out of my eyes and seeing the road. Does that make sense? Like I remember seeing my picture and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh crap, what have I been looking at? Like, what have I been seeing? Obviously I drove and I was fine. That's trance. We go in and out of it all the time, especially when we're doing tasks that we know very well, or they don't take a lot of thought. They don't take a lot of energy. What is happening is our brain waves are going into a certain state that we call, and what do we say? We say we're dazing out. We're spacing out. It's the same thing. So we do it already on our own all the time. When we are inducing it now, and now I'm going to use a different type of an induction, well, then I've got different techniques that I can do to do that. So there's relaxation techniques. There's pattern interrupters. There's instant and rapid inductions because I confuse your brain. So they're confusing inductions is what they're called. I can do any of these things. However, then is what is actually happening and what are we wanting to do is we're in essence putting to sleep the left side of the brain. Our right brain, which is our subconscious, is always active. And so that means we're bypassing the manager and so we call that a trance state. So like I said, for a lot of people, that's really easy to do then through relaxation, because again, it's a very natural thing. It is naturally a part of who we are. This is not some hocus pocus and some weird voodoo that we're doing. So then that way, the things that you wish for your life, you're bypassing your internal critic, your inner critic, basically, to the part of us that is yes, yes, and yes, that is saying yes to life and that believes in you and that knows that you would only then create only what it thought was good for itself. So that's trance.
And the other part of the question was about the relationship between sexuality and induction, because I mean, there are these communities of people who, like men teaching each other to do predatory subconscious manipulation of women.
Yep.
But there's also this very sort of normal relationship that I'm curious about, because you want to be able to say yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
You need to be relaxed. If we look at what people enjoy saying or hearing said, you know, some of that has an induction quality. If, you know, in the way a person might move toward you, there's a sort of unspecified significance to certain movements, which puts you in a trance, and you want to be able to focus on this. And a lot of people are concerned in their sexuality. I'd like to, but I just can't focus enough to get into my sexual mode. I don't think it's going to go well. And so there's very interesting parallels there. How do you see that?
Performance anxiety. That was the first word. Anyway, that's what that is, right? It's performance. We all have this performance anxiety. So what do I think about that? I think it would be really great if people understood and were more aware that this is a thing. Exactly what you said. And I think that's going to be the biggest thing for folks is like, wait, what? If they're listening to this, I think that's going to be, wait, what did he just say? I feel like it was significant, but I feel like I missed something. It's a thing. How we move in relationship to another, how we then talk, and when we talk, and do we speed up and do we slow down? How are we making eye contact? Eye gazing. There's a form of hypnotism that is called mesmerism from Mesmer. That's actually where hypnosis came from. And it is only done, not a single word. It is only done through an intense, short amount of time eye gaze. It does this strange interrupt. So, but we do that regularly with people that we love or people that we like, right? And then we talk about lighting. Why did people always go have candlelit dinners? Why are candlelit dinners so wonderful and amazing? Well, because of how it constricts our eyes. It softens blemishes. But more than anything, that soft type of glowing, warm, woomy light makes us feel comfortable, makes us feel safe. We are then relaxed. And now we're more receptive then towards the other person and towards ourselves for that matter. So yes, this is all playing a part in all of that. And in which case, if you wished to learn it to be able to use that for yourself or to use it on others, then you absolutely could. And in which case it's go for it. As long as you're not doing harm to yourself or harm to others, and you're recognizing we're manipulating people all the time to believe what we believe. Let's just get that out of the way. We're doing this regularly. However, then are you ethically bribing? Are you ethically manipulating folks for the better pleasurement of both of you so you can both show up in a different way? Absolutely. Learn more about it. Use it if you want to or don't, but just recognize that it is there in play. We're hypnotizing each other all the time. We've met those charismatic people or those salespeople, or if it's a church person, or if it's a wherever you had, and you're just like, they have that thing. They have that magnetism. I love them. It's a thing.
Earlier when you said if you know 100 things about sex, people only ask about two.
Yes.
It makes me think of the possibility of describing this in terms of developmental phases, right? So that a lot of people are coming in and they're only at that level of sexual wisdom or sexual curiosity, whatever that level is.
Yep.
What's next? First of all, do you see people's experience unfolding in recurrent stage-like patterns, if it unfolds?
Mm-hmm.
And what would come next, right? If you have somebody who's only interested in those first few things about, is it okay for me to want or not want what I want, and how am I performing?
Right.
If they move on from there, where do they move on to?
Oh my gosh. Yes. Where do they move on from there? They don't even know. So it can go in so many directions. And this is where it gets fun, because now we're getting to do this inner engineering. We're now getting to craft what this looks like. So the next level is it's better. It's more free. It feels happier. It feels more complete. However, for some people, there's a little uncomfortable period because they've never stopped to ask themselves, what do they want? And if I gave myself permission to express myself however I wanted, what would I really do? Because for a lot of people, they won't even imagine into those things because they were too afraid of what they might come up with and what that might mean about them now, and how they might judge themselves and how others might judge them. So when you get past kind of these, and it's not to minimize anyone's experience, because I recognize the amount of pain that people are experiencing by, does my size matter? Am I going to be good enough? Am I this or am I that? It's a thing. So I recognize that. However, it is the lowest level of stuff, really. It's come on, there is Tantra things. What does that mean? It means that there is a bigger spiritual connection and level of intimacy that can happen, whether it's intercourse and in and out or not. If it's even just petting, kissing, eye gazing, whatever the heck it is. So the next level is, what do you want? So now we then have to work through some fear. Usually there's fear and judgment. So that is the next stage. Once we get past that stage, and there's an absolute ownership. And any time that we honor and recognize ourselves, every single time, people feel good. They feel peace. They feel and they recognize, oh, this is how it's supposed to feel. And this is wonderful. However you choose it. Does that mean now you're going to go get into kinks and fetish and other than vanilla sex and, whatever that is, and multiple partner? Brilliant. But maybe not. Just the ownership of, this is what I like. Brilliant. That is so freeing. It could be that simple. It is so freeing. So there's freedom, there's love, there's acceptance, and there's a larger level of connection that you will not be able to experience ever until you give yourself permission. And this will be the thing that breaks up your relationships, messes you up, because we do re-traumatize ourselves. You'll keep re-objectifying yourself, wondering why I can't feel the way that I want to feel.
Tantra is interesting because it brings things like sexuality together with spirituality. There's a lot of spiritual traditions where it sort of makes people feel like their sexuality and all of their vital energies in life are the enemy of their spirituality.
Right, exactly.
And I'm curious if you see any racial or demographic differences in terms of how people relate their sexuality to their spirituality.
Religion. So let's look at which races and cultures in whichever country that you live in, and what are the predominant religions and what do they teach? So here in America, then yes. So again, this is one of the bigger reasons why I don't see Black people as far as sex therapy. Not that I won't see them, but they won't come see me because of the influence of religion. People, and I'm from California. I now live in the South, which is a really interesting thing. So then heavily religious in the South, aren't they? In certain states, for that matter, certain countries are heavily religious. And it doesn't mean that religion always means separation. However, the way that we've interpreted it these days, for the most part, it does. So that exactly is the indicator on who's going to come see me. So from a racial perspective, that is exactly why I see mostly white people, is because honestly, there's more white folks around here anyway, and in the States, that are in other spirituality things and not so much organized religion, quite honestly. So yeah, there's that direct correlation of it. And we always, that is the thing, 100% of the time, when I have these other races that do come in, and again, also for white folks, is what is your belief system? How did that damage you? What was the force-fed truth, whether or not it's even your belief system? How did that damage you? And let's undo that stuff, because that absolutely is so much shame and guilt is taught in religion. It is such a sad thing. And you said something right at the beginning, which was spirituality and sexuality. They're not separate. None of this is separate. And that's why we've gotten ourselves into the thing that we've gotten ourselves into, is that we've separated, mental energy, emotional energy, spiritual energy, sexual energy. They're all separate things. So now we can have all these separate problems. You see, sexual energy is spiritual energy. It is, there's no judgment. There's no taboo in all that is, you see. So.
Thank you. What's your sense of your own development relative to thinking about sexuality or sexual intelligence or wisdom or whatever it is? What are sort of the major phases that you've gone through, or some of the key moments that, to your mind, really anchor a new phase, a new understanding, a new approach to sexuality?
Well, you done and did it. You done and asked the question. So I have a thing on YouTube that's called Sex Addict to Sex Therapist. And that's exactly what happened. So Reader's Digest version, and if I just to skip so you can see those highlight pieces, is I was raised in a family that there was a lot of molestation and sexual abuse. That was the family secret. So my mom's generation within my family, and just to give context, we had 5 generations alive at the same time. And a lot of friends. So this is the Spanish side of my family in particular. And so anyway, pervasive in the family, lots of sexual abuse. So I was raised already knowing at a very young age, or at least sensing sexual energy, and then in a negative way, in the power and control way, in the bad way. And then not only was it known, but then it was this massive secret, right? You cannot tell these types of secrets. This is not what we do. So this is how I was raised. These were some of the stories. I then myself had sexual abuse happen, and multiple times, and also then learned to internalize all of that so that objectify myself before others could objectify me. So for me then, because there's some people that when there is sexual abuse, they go the opposite direction. They want to disappear, or they gain a lot of weight. They want to, they don't want people to be able to see them. They have zero interest in sex or any of that sort of stuff because they're too afraid. I went the other way, which was, I already knew that I was hypersexualized, because that's what happens when kids are sexually abused. I was already hypersexualized. This has been a conversation. If I looked at the theme as an adult looking back and deciding that I wanted to be a sex therapist or needed to, and all of these things, it was recognizing my awareness about sexuality was way more than what it should have been at a very, very young age. So much so that I almost can't separate and tell you. Like 3 years old, I knew how to orgasm. I knew what that was. So skipping along then, so at 7 years old, there was a trauma. At 9 years old, there was a trauma, and bringing that into my adulthood. Now into my adulthood, and how do I relate to this? So my coping mechanism, because there is a coping mechanism every single time, was to, the way I could assert control over my out of control feeling was to then, number one, bulimia. I decided that I was going to pick up an eating disorder. Almost, not all, but almost every person that I see that's been sexually abused also has an eating disorder. Food and sexuality and life and digestion are so intertwined, it's ridiculous. So then here was my wake up call. So let me say, when I finally decided that I was going to have sex, forget about it. Okay, instead of feeling the shame and guilt that I had received from church, because I had some really traumatic events with sexuality that happened within the church, then this was my acting out. I'm going to objectify you before you can objectify me. And so that turned into obsessive thoughts about sex and sexuality, which then breeds a sex therapist, or not, sorry, sex addict, right? So then, and what is a sex addict versus someone who is hypersexual is then addiction is when you put yourself in harm's way, irregardless of consequences or pretty much retribution to yourself or to others. Like you don't give two F's about what happens. You're more concerned about the fix. So so you put yourself in all types of weird compromising positions. So I operated from this place for years. I was also in the military. That really is supportive of that type of life. So then it was when I was, so then I started drinking. Coping mechanism, alcoholism, let's throw that into the mix. I come in from that family. And so then this is important because what I would do in order to be able to sleep with a whole bunch of people, in order to be able to operate I needed to numb out. Hence the alcohol, hence becoming an alcoholic so that I wasn't present to the damage that I was doing to myself, right? So it was when I had this one boyfriend at a time and I was drinking to blackout because that's what I did, so that way I could cope with myself and my behavior. And I had gotten to that point and he told me about myself the next day. This was 2009. And this is when, and so then imagine I've already gotten out of the military. I've already finished my degree in psychology. I already knew I wanted to be a sex therapist, but I hadn't really gone through the steps yet to do this. And so he said, you backed into a corner as if I was going to do something to you, that I was going to hurt you. He goes, you've got real problems. Here's the lie that I got to tell myself is because I was sexually open to conversation, I could talk about my trauma. I could talk about these different things. Then I looked like, and I presented as I was sexually evolved. I knew what was going on because I knew myself. Oh, that was the great illusion, my friend. So 2009, I went to my first SAR, which is a sexual attitude restructuring program. I then went to that school for a master's PhD program in clinical sexuality. That there at that SAR for that 7-day situation, and they're all over the country. They're all over the place. For that was my pivot. That was one of my then major pivot points is I then had to recognize how I was raised, the stories that I had, what I had done to myself, what my family had done to itself. And I had to rage. That was a pivot point, 2009. Then from there, because I then shifted how I was thinking and what I was feeling and what was accessible, now I had to start forgiving myself. I had to stop the addiction part. What ended up happening is psyche stopped it for me, meaning I knew that I didn't want to treat my body in this way anymore. And so what did I do? I attempted to do it anyway. I would attempt to go still sleep with these people that I didn't care about and thinking about them the same way I thought about sex and all of these sorts of things. And then I started getting physically sick after that. I would go throw up. So then it was like, I don't get to do that anymore. Okay, shit. So that was about 2013, I think, 2011, that fully sunk in that way. So it took me about 2 years to correct my own behavior. So then from there, I've had these massive leaps and bounds. And quite honestly, then this completing of, and I'm still on my own journey for sure, because of all of the things that I did do to myself and the thinking and how entangled it got, that then certain things couldn't be healed until I had a partner that I actually cared about and that I loved and that I was in a relationship. So a lot of it, I did a lot of cleaning up on my own. Those were my advancements. For me, it was, I had to recognize what was going on and be very honest. I then had to be very angry and rage and hold whoever responsible I had to hold, which then I could get to the place that I could own responsibility for the way that I perpetuated my own abuser. I became my own abuser. I had to take responsibility for that and clean that up and grieve that. And then I could be open to what else? What next? What else is out there? That there are people having these wonderful, loving, healthy relationships. What does that look like for me? What do I want for me and in my relationship? And then I was on that path. And so now I can say for sure that I'm still learning. There's still things that I recognize even just the other day that it was like, oh man, I still haven't given me and my husband permission to go there yet. Isn't that interesting? Wouldn't I like to? Yes, I would. So you see, so that's still a long version, but a Reader's Digest version of my path.
That's great. I appreciate your ability to share that.
Thank
The
you.
military background intrigues me as well. I think there's sort of, if I imagine what I think the public imagination is about military and sexuality, it maybe has 3 parts, right? One part is the fetishization of uniforms.
Yes.
One part is the issue of institutionalized rape culture and hierarchical subordination.
It's a fraternity.
The part is this ongoing cultural debate about whether transgender and homosexual people are going to utterly disrupt the camaraderie. So what's your overall impression of military and sexuality? How do they fit together? How real are those issues, and what do we do about real issues?
So to me, for people that haven't been in the military, if you want any sort of give me an idea of what that's like. If you went to a college, like if you physically went to a college and were even around fraternities, sororities, or heard about them or knew anything about them, it's like that times 10. There's a book, Sexy Secrets to a Juicy Love Life, that I did a chapter in, and I literally just have it here because I was writing for somebody for it. Anyway, the chapter that I wrote in it is called Nice Shoes Wanna Fuck. Because that's exactly what somebody said to me in the military. That is the mentality. It does not matter if you're married, in partnership, children, no children, because there's the idea of pulling into port. Okay, so Navy, and I'm going to use nautical terms, right? We're talking ships and shit. So literally, people pull in and out of port. Depending on if you're at a permanent duty station and you're not on ships come in, visiting ships. And so you think about the majority of the age. The military is a very young military. It's a very young fraternity. You retire at 40, right? How many? And it's 17 and 18-year-olds that come in. And so what is the average age of the military? Is like freaking 27, right? You are old in the military if you're 27. This is important because then this pulling it out of port idea, this I'm only here for a second. What does it matter? What are they going to know anyway? It's very compulsive. It's very OCD. Like, it is very obsessive compulsive. I get to act on what I want whenever I want without real repercussion. Who cares? Everybody's doing it. And so that is like the perfect sum up of, hey, nice shoes, want to fuck. It is nothing personal. I could go find any hole to go fill or not fill. I can go get sex wherever I want. Somebody will say yes to me regardless of what I look like. That is a massive part of the culture. Again, military is a fraternity that then has women in it. That by itself is a really interesting, damaging situation when we start talking about sexuality. And then, of course, a rape culture. Yes, indeed. So you've got this military that really doesn't want to be looked at as a rape culture, but it absolutely is. It absolutely has all of those components. And you've got power and control disproportionate to any other way you will ever see it demonstrated out in the real world. Not even comparable to even moving up corporate ladders and things like this, you see. So it's really interesting because legally and according to the UCMJ, we're not supposed to act a certain way. In the UCMJ, which is our book of laws, for the military, missionary is still in it as the only way that you're allowed to have sex. That right now, right this second, if you know of a military member and that they have doggy style sex, you could go tell on them and they could technically get in trouble according to the UCMJ. So sexuality in the military is so effed and so weird and convoluted. Doesn't matter. My last duty station, some people will know where that was and some people don't. So my last duty station, it was pervasive. Swingers all over the place. We also had what we called the red light district. Most bases have, I'm telling our secrets, folks. I'm sorry, military friends. We have red light districts on your own base, in base housing, in which you either would put a red light bulb, and this is when your husbands were deployed. So I got stationed on a Marine base. My last 3.5 years, I was stationed with the Marines. And every single time when units deployed, all them ladies, boys, whoever were at the club. The club was the fullest whenever folks deployed. The red light district is when your husbands or whoever's were deployed, you put a red light bulb, leave your door open, literally anybody walk in for sex. That's what you did. When they started realizing people were doing that, you put a broom in your rafter thing and leave your door open or cracked. Scandal and disease. And it's the joke. We talked about every Monday off a weekend. We'd be like, tell me the scandal and disease. What did you hear? Who Master Chief did what? What did they do? Tell me. Because somebody always had the dirt. It is a mess, honestly.
I'm curious about maybe, what's missing to make it a more impressive organization, because the military has some wonderful elements. It has these problematic elements,
right?
And you're talking about how young most of the people are. And I'm wondering where where the older people are and what their duty is to be wise custodians and teachers. The other day I was listening to the news about this. The Australians were apologizing for their soldiers having shot Afghanistan prisoners to get practice and points.
Boy.
And they were described as special elite soldiers. And I thought, that doesn't sound special or elite. Right. So, and I thought, where are the people who are supposed to make them special and elite, really mature, super soldier people that we hope they're going to be? Where are those people? What should they be doing? And what could help transform that culture?
Where are the mentors? Right. That's what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing, here's the big thing, is those people that stayed in the military, those young people that still had those ideas, a lot of them did not evolve. Moving up in rank didn't mean there was a requirement to move up in evolution and consciousness, right? So a lot of wounded people are in charge, and they get to use their power and control in ways that are not useful. That is the majority. That is what the military honors. The military honors those that will exert power and control over other people. That's the nature of the military, is to demonstrate ourselves. It is not, particularly Americans military too, right? Everybody's going to have a little bit of a different story, but ultimately is not about defending anything. It's about, we are provokers. We have been provokers, we've all that type of stuff. So anyway, there are absolutely wonderful, beautiful people that are mentors and whatnot, and they are doing great change. And those are the ones too that then have the sailors of the year that are their staff that's under them and not in their ranking. And so there are those people, thankfully so, they are the hope, they are the light. It would require that the military required more consciousness, emotional, mental therapy type things to be a bigger part of the conversation, that part of the development. They're really great at, for us, Sailor of the Year, right? There's tracks depending on your military affiliation, how you become the best sailor, the best Marine, the best that. Where's the class that says, how do you become the best person? There isn't that class. That's where we would really have change. That's where then, here's the thing, it is a real threat to the military and its structure to have individuals. That's why you don't have individuals. You have you know what I mean? There's no the military is the epitome of, you do not exist. You are a number, you are cattle. It is the collective that is more important than you. It is a real threat to the collective and how it is currently constructed for most militaries to encourage people to evolve and think for themselves. Because if people thought for themselves, you already know what I'm going to say next. If people were conscious, would they be in the military at all? No, they would not. So
that must be a tricky balance for them, like assuming they were even open to the contradictions involved, because for the foreseeable future, we do need a really competent military. Mm-hmm. And can we run that in a way that is more individual friendly and less locked down in terms of our emotional responses and less exaggeratedly aggressive? Like, there must be people who think those are key features of the military continuing to do its job. Right. And assuming that job needs to be done, at least for a while, can that job be done with the kind of changes you were talking about?
No, not the way I see it. I would imagine that there would be some gurus and some other people that could see this in a different way. And even then, that doesn't feel right in my spirit. So I don't think that would even be the answer. No, I don't think so. The reason why is the idea of the need for military is fear of separation. So we're building our entire force on fear. We are never going to win. So, you're never going to win that fight. Can we do it better? Yeah. Can we honor people a little bit more and whatever? However, some of the things from a tactical perspective, if I'm being very honest. So here's a really good example. Women are not allowed to be SEALs. The reason why is we menstruate. There is so a lot of people can get upset about this, right? Let's just leave it right there for a second. Lots and lots of men in the military don't believe women should be in the military at all. Point blank. One of my RDCs was one of those people. He said it all the time. I don't think women should be allowed in the military. Okay, brilliant, fine, fabulous, whatever. You think how you think about that. So then when the SEAL thing came up, and so people would ask, how do you feel about that? Okay, there's a part of me that wants to be like, women can do whatever we want. From a tactical perspective, because I menstruate, I am trackable. If I am in war, if I am trying to infiltrate somewhere or I'm trying to defend something, if a dog can sniff me out, that's a real freaking problem for the mission. Yes? So inherently, I have a thing. So now how do I want to feel about that? I could take that however I want. But from a tactical, from a mission perspective, even myself, if I'm trying to build a team to go in somewhere, I'm not going to put it's extra supplies I have to bring for you because we have this thing now that could compromise the mission, you see. So I'd have to be more committed to the mission. However, are any of our missions ever good missions? Ultimately, there are lots of good things the military does as far as rescuing folks and going into places to get people out of harm's way. That is absolutely wonderful. If that's what our military was built off of doing, was to truly lend support in a way that was useful, beautiful. That is not the structure and the basis for our military and why we have it. And so therefore, we're going to keep bumping up against this consciousness conversation is it does not serve the larger mission of the military and what its mission is by our government and most people's governments, because it is fear-based, because it's, I'm afraid they have something that I might not have. It is nothing about love, expansion, and truly saving one humanity. It's not. So therefore, can we really fix that? We don't have any desire to actually fix it, you see. It doesn't serve the mission.
What about physical health? This is interesting. What do you tell people about health and their bodies? Because, you know, if you're overfed or underslept, or you can't distribute blood to the periphery of your body, these seem like things that must be at the heart of a lot of people's sexual issues in a culture that's not particularly physically healthy or eating well.
Yes. So perfect. So glad you said that. Any health, let alone our sexual health. Hello, can we do better? We suck. We suck at taking care of ourselves. And yes, so here's some of the very real ways that this is Viagra. What was Viagra's purpose? It was not to make people hard. It is a heart medication that's a vasodilator that is a happy side of effect, as a really happy side of effect for most people is they get to have a happy ending now. So my point is, nutrition, certain things going on in the body, your anxiety and your stress levels will absolutely affect your sexual performance, whether or not your body for a woman will lubricate, whether or not for a man it can sustain even an erection and all of these types of things. Our neurotransmitters, our dopamine, the things that make us feel good, the feel good chemicals that bring connection, oxytocin, those types of stuff. You don't need to know those words. Those chemicals exist. They're in our body. They are created directly from the food that you eat. If you are eating crap food, you are creating crappy receptors. Like I wish people, mental health issues, 40% of them, if not more, all start in the gut. There are brain cells, emotional cells, if you will, in the gut. Serotonin, one of our biggest good feeler chemicals, neurotransmitters, is actually created in the gut. If you have, so very basic biology, if you have digestion issues, you will most likely have depression, anxiety, some of these things, ADHD, ADD for children, autism, all of that stuff has to do with what is being put in our body and the type of stuff. The neurotransmitters are going to be made, but how happy can one really be if you created the neurotransmitter with some freaking canned beans and a hot dog? You know what I mean? Like, this is basic shit. So absolutely. Then from a sexual perspective, there are things that you can eat. Drink almonds, help boost testosterone. Women that you're going through menopause and you don't feel sexy and your stuff is drying up and you don't have a sex drive, almonds help with that. Men, there's lots of men that have low T counts. As we get older, different stuff happens and our hormones start getting in funny things. Our food affects our hormones. So absolutely can affect desire, how well your body can lubricate, how well it can maintain and perform in the way that you want it to, and all of those things. Absolutely.
We're probably coming near the end now. I'm thinking back to that early remark about you know, only getting asked about 2% of the things that you know and think about. I'm sure we've covered a few of those things today, but I'm curious about, what else you think is lurking in your storehouse of information that people don't ask you about. What would you love to be asked about that never gets requested, never comes up?
The simple stuff like, what else can I do? Idea generation. That is one of the things that white folks, honestly, go to more of these different types of groups, these different types of sexual expression and things. They seem to be much more open to it than everybody else is. That lights me up. The most exciting thing to me is when people are like, what else can I do? And they feel good about it. Like, okay, I don't want to just leave it like this where it's boring and that it's, there's not connection and all of these things. I want to like it and enjoy it. What more can I do? What else is out there? So those are more of the fun conversations, and it's super light, really. It's super easy, which is lotions and potions. Is it swinger, polyamory? Are there different types of kink? Is it role play? Is it dressing up? Is it just sending a sexy text? Is it sending an outfit? Is exploring the ways that feel good for one to then connect with themselves and for them to connect with others. That's what sexuality is. It's communication. It's a form of communication. So that's more of it, really, is how do we play more and how do we feel more good stuff? Because of the fact that most of the time when people come to me, it's about the bad stuff, right? How do I not feel so shameful, guilty, all of these things, judged, blah, blah, blah. I would love for people to come to me more and be like, how can I make this and enjoy this more and make this more fun and give myself permission? Because then that denotes you have given yourself permission to show up. And that's always beautiful.
This is terrific. We've covered, race and the military and abuse and spirituality and trance and a fantastic range of conversation. I really appreciate it. Thanks for being with us, Dr. Sabrina.
You are so welcome. This has been absolutely amazing. And I also want to say to you, thank you so much for having me. And I appreciate the platform that you offer for these types of conversations to happen. This is how you asked earlier. How do we, what do we do? What next? This is how we do it. We make these conversations normal and out there and accessible. So I truly appreciate the work that you're doing and giving platform and place for lots and lots of people who are searching for answers. Thank you so much.